everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, June 20th, 2024, and we're going to be talking about those wonderful people, the banksters. There's a lot of news in banking going on right now, and right up front, let me tell you, I have to wonder if perhaps somehow in the dark, murky labyrinth that is banking, if these two very discrete and different stories that I'm going to be talking about are not related. But anyway, don't forget, tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. U.S. Central Time, we do have our afternoon vid chat. This will be our third and last vid chat for the month of June, so please get your questions and comments in no later than tonight, Thursday night, June 20th at 10 p.m. U.S. Central Time. And as usual, I'll be in the chat room a little early to talk with all of you and make sure everything is up and running smoothly. All right, the first story that we're going to talk about is titled Chase Bank Customers Are Reporting a Wave of Wire Fraud in Their Accounts. The bank won't make good on the looted funds. This is a very interesting story with, I think, a moral. So I'm going to be citing from the very beginning of this article several paragraphs, and then I'm going to skip to a paragraph toward the end of it and then give you a little summary courtesy of Catherine Austin Fitz. So here we go. Quote, on January 29th, Anne Marie Murphy and two of her colleagues at a law firm, Crotchet, Petra, and McCarthy, LLP in Santa Monica, California, filed a lawsuit in Superior Court on behalf of a 76-year-old widow, Diane Artemis Yaffe. Scammers had tricked Ms. Yaffe into making 7 wire transfers out of her Chase Bank account, which tallied up to the astonishing sum of $1.8 million, or the bulk of her funds at the time. There are 3 things which jump out of the factual details in the case that would appear to be legally problematic for Chase Bank, the federally insured retail banking unit of J.P. Morgan Chase Bank N.A. Firstly, the 6-figure wires were completely out of character for this elderly client. Secondly, the huge sums were being wired out of the country. Thirdly, the funds that Chase Bank wired were originally at Bank of America and were only transferred to Chase Bank because Bank of America had the good sense to refuse to make the wire transfers for this elderly widow. But rather than accept responsibility and make the widow whole, J.P. Morgan Chase has hired the international corporate law firm Steptoe to represent it in the court case. The bank has also forced the removal of the case out of state court to federal court, a move which is very competently challenged by Ms. Yaffe's attorneys and appears ready to engage in copious motions, of course, to drag out the case. Knowing this bank's history of felony counts, and folks, I want to stop right there. Catherine Austin Fitz did a report a few quarters back in her Solari report of all the different felony counts and fines that this one bank has had to pay. And it's truly through the roof. So if you don't believe that, go read Catherine's quarterly reports and look up J.P. Morgan Chase, because that list of their financial crimes will truly astonish you. So knowing this bank's history of felony counts and an unprecedented rap sheet, and that's basically what Ms. Fitz does, is she gives you the entire rap sheet. It occurred to us that these fraudulent wire transfers might not be an isolated event at Chase Bank. We went to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's complaint database and put Chase Bank wire fraud in the search box. It brought up 558 responses. If you consider that possibly 1 out of 50 Americans know about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's complaint database, and fewer still would take the time to file a complaint as opposing to going to law enforcement. The 558 complaints involving wire fraud, note that, wire fraud, appear to us to be deeply concerning. In addition, the dates of the filing of complaints show that dozens of the complaints have occurred in the past 6 months in widely dispersed geographic areas, including California, New York, Oregon, Colorado, Arizona, Texas, and Ohio, among others. Now let me stop right there. If you have a lot of little wire fraud going on, apparently 558 cases of it, you can do a whole lot of big money laundering. That's my point, and that's what makes me wonder if there may, in fact, be a larger pattern here that we need to pay attention to, and to whom is all of this money going? And again, if you're laundering money in a particular way, it could be going to a lot of different places that ultimately end up in the same place. Who knows? But it's highly suspicious that you have such a pattern of activity at one bank. So skipping towards the end here, quote, on such and such a date and such a month in 2024, and I'm saying that, folks, because the date and month are not given, multiple accounts at Chase Bank were simultaneously hit with wire fraud. This is a customer complaining, we have never used wires before. These hackers were so sophisticated that they were able to first do interbank transfers from both of my daughter's savings accounts, which I am on, into my and my husband's saving account, which I am on, but they are not. And then from my savings account wired out 3 sums of money simultaneously to 3 different U.S. banks and credit unions. When we ask Chase how all this happened, we get a different story every time, and now we get no response at all. After going to the bank branch, I put the call on speaker. X immediately recognized the phone number as the desk sitting next to her. Caught on camera, you can see my husband and X go to the empty desk that the spoof call was supposedly coming from. She was shocked that the hackers were able to impersonate Chase, unquote. Now, folks, all I can say is the lesson here, beyond whatever patterns might be going on here, and again, I find it highly suspicious that this pattern concentrates on this one bank. And it's not to say that there are not similar patterns at other banks. There are. And you'll find most of them are the big banks. And this suggests to me that there may be a component, a hidden financial system, such as I've been arguing for many years, would have to have the hidden participation of an infrastructure designed to hide it. And this is what this activity sounds suspiciously to me like it is. But even barring that hypothesis being true, what you have here, folks, and I'm going to borrow very heavily from Catherine Austin Fitz here, what you have here, folks, is a case of a bank that's not only too big to fail, it's also too big to care about its customers. This is why I personally do not bank with these large banks, none of them. They are not worthy of my trust. Not that any smaller banks are any more trustworthy, but at least their smallness gives you an opportunity to oversee your accounts and hold them responsible for overseeing your accounts too. So let's turn to the other bit of banking news that I said we have to look at as perhaps somehow in some deep murky way being connected to this sort of money laundering activity. Because if you look at that money laundering activity, what they're really doing is they're hoovering up cash. So this story came from many of you. I'm going to read one particular version of it, titled Major Japanese Bank Sets Crash Course for American Shores. And this is a fairly lengthy article, but I want you to pay attention to the paragraphs that I'm going to be reading from it. So we'll start at the beginning. The article is by David Hageeth. It's dateline June 19th, 2024, just yesterday. Quote, is the next big bank collapse coming from Japan? One of those too big to fail banks just announced that it is plotting a crash course. It says it's a course, of course, to avoid a crash. Japan's biggest agricultural bank will dispose of the foreign bonds gradually during the fiscal year ending in March, a company spokesman said in an email. It expects a loss of 1.5 trillion yen for the year, triple the previous estimate of 500 billion yen. Now I'm skipping several paragraphs here. With an investment portfolio equivalent to $357 billion, Norinchukin is one of the largest Japanese investors in international financial markets. Trading desks from London to New York were buzzing with speculation on Tuesday about where the bank might shift its holdings. In other words, the amount of assets the bank is looking to sell off, which is when unrealized losses become realized losses, is enough to move markets and drop yields or raise yields on any particular assets it buys as replacements. Interestingly, the bank is suddenly looking to start realizing its losses now because many of its assets are U.S. assets, and the Federal Reserve has made it clear that its next rate cut is a ways off. Rate cuts would help save the bank by bringing down the yields on those bonds, which raises the value of the bonds. So when a major bank like this decides to sell a whole slew of those assets because it believes the losses will be greater later if they try to hang on longer. They are trying to minimize their losses. In other words, read between the lines there, folks. What he's telling you is Norinchukin Bank is looking to sell off a lot of American bonds. That's what he's saying. That's huge, folks. So the bank is going to offload as many of these bonds as it can between now and next March, because when you have that much to move, like a large ship, you change course slowly. Now I'm skipping several paragraphs here. The Fed's long tightening cycle as it seeks to kill inflation has been just as rough on a lot of foreign banks as it has been on U.S. banks, such as those banks that failed in the spring of last year. Norinchukin just got to where it did not seem like a good risk to try to avoid major losses by holding out longer. Better to take them on the chin now because the Fed clearly has a lot more inflation fighting to go. In other words, the Fed's policy of trying to fight inflation while the U.S. government is recklessly trying to spend itself into oblivion and prop up all of its wars through all of that spending. We have a fiscal policy in this country that's absolutely nuts and out of control because there's no agreement between the government now and the central bank. So in that situation, folks, if you are a foreign holder like this Japanese bank of a lot of U.S. securities, what do you do when you're confronted by such an insane and mutually exclusive and contradictory policy? Well, you start to sell your bonds. Folks, this is disastrous. This is how not to have a reserve currency. So to continue with the article, quote, so faced with no other options, Norinchukin is doing the only thing it can, an orderly liquidation of tens of billions of securities now when they are still liquid and still carry a high price in hopes of avoiding a disorderly liquidation, and much worse in a few months when the bond market freezes up. Now, if you've been following all of that so far, you're going to know what the next problem is. Once a major foreign holder of U.S. securities announces that it's going to be selling those assets and trying to buy up other assets, what do you do if you're holding similar assets? So here we go with the final few paragraphs of this article. Norinchukin plans to sell over 10 trillion yen in foreign bonds in addition to its normal trading activities. Now, folks, I'm going to guess here and speculate that in addition to American bonds, what Norinchukin might also be selling off in terms of its foreign asset portfolio would be European bonds. That's just a guess, but I think given the situation geopolitically and financially, it's probably a sound one. So whose assets are they going to buy? Guess who, folks? Can you say the BRICS countries? Can you say India? Can you say Russia, Singapore, maybe even Indonesia, the Philippines, and so on and so forth? So once the selling begins, the bank will be lucky if it can get even a fraction of the proceeds it hopes for, because all the other banks won't just be standing there twiddling their thumbs as they wait to see how massively No-Chew reprices the market. And it's not just banks. If and when the selling begins by a bank that holds 20% of all foreign bonds in Japan, the liquidation cascade will quickly spread to Mrs. Watanabe. According to the U.S. Treasury Department, Japanese investors held $1.18 trillion worth of U.S. government bonds as of March, the largest slice among foreign holders. In other words, just average Japanese citizens going out and buying U.S. Treasury bonds. So watch that to start selling off. So yes, as the bank and Mrs. Watanabe's and other average people in Japan make this move to sell off, it will affect Treasury bond yields upwardly and the U.S. bond values downwardly. Massive sales by Norinchukin could have a sizable effect on the U.S. bond market. And since we now know what is happening, it is only a matter of time before everyone else front-runs Norinchukin. So there you have it. We might be watching the first of many sell-offs of U.S. Treasuries from our friends and allies. Now, this is something that we've been watching the Russians and Chinese doing, but now, folks, it's spread to Japan. So if you want to watch the crash continue, keep supporting stupid government policies and stupid fiscal policies, and I would aver mutually contradictory ones. They've gotten themselves into a mess now that all the standard tools of trying to get out of such messes are not working. I personally expect this to try to spread. I think eventually the United States government is going to have to do something to stem the flow. And I don't think starting more wars is a good idea. I don't think that's in the cards because we're losing allies. So this is a mess, folks, something to watch. I do suspect, even though I don't know exactly how, I do suspect all of these stories about wire fraud and cyber hacking of financial institutions are somehow related at a very, very, very deep level to stories of security sell-offs and so on. This is the problem, as Catherine Austin Fitts has said many times, with cyber systems. They are simply not secure. And with so much of the world's financial clearing being done through cyber systems, and the ability to hack and create hidden systems is there for all to see. So again, my advice, use cash. And don't bank with the too big to care banks. Okay? So that's it for today's news and views. Don't forget, tomorrow's vid chat is at 2 p.m. According to schedule. I'll be there a little early. Get your questions and comments submitted no later than 10 o'clock U.S. Central Time tonight, Thursday night. And hopefully I'll see all of you good people tomorrow during the vid chat. Bye-bye, and God bless. We'll see you on the flip side.